The morphine had just started to wear off when my phone buzzed. I was propped up in a hospital bed of a line taped to my hand, the steady beep of the heart monitor reminding me that everything inside my chest had been rearranged hours earlier. My husband had left 10 minutes before saying he needed to grab coffee. The notification banner glowed against the dim room. $14,800 charged to joint card Azure Seas luxury cruise. For a moment I assumed it was fraud. That's what responsible people assume first. I tapped the alert, slowly ignoring the tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with stitches. The charge was real. Confirmed. Processed. My first thought was that someone had cloned our card. My second thought was that I would handle it tomorrow. Then I remembered we shared an email account for major purchases. I opened it. There it was. Booking confirmation, 7-night Caribbean escape, 2 guests departure. April 18th. April 18th. My discharge papers said I wasn't allowed to lift anything heavier than 5 pounds by then. My name was not listed. His was. Alongside guest. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, waiting for context to materialize. It didn't. I didn't know then how important that receipt would become. Money has never been abstract to me. It's structure. It's planning. It's security. For most of our marriage I handled the finances. Not because my husband couldn't, but because I was better at it. I tracked our investments, balanced retirement contributions, scheduled mortgage payments, and kept a detailed spreadsheet of recurring expenses. Every large purchase required a conversation. That wasn't control. It was a partnership. I earned slightly more than he did. Not dramatically, but enough that I carried the majority of our savings contributions. I didn't resent it. I saw our finances as shared architecture. If something needed adjusting, I adjusted it. When my cardiologist mentioned surgery, I didn't panic financially. I reviewed our insurance coverage. I calculated deductible thresholds. I confirmed short-term disability payouts. I made sure nothing would destabilize us. Stability is my default. I don't impulse buy. I don't gamble on emotion. I plan 3 steps ahead, not because I'm anxious, but because I prefer clarity over chaos. My husband used to joke that I could spot a budgeting error from across the room. He wasn't wrong. That's why the cruise charge didn't feel like an oversight. It felt deliberate. Before the surgery, I made a point of sitting down with him at the kitchen table and walking through our recovery timeline. I showed him the post-operative restrictions. I explained the medical leave paperwork. I even scheduled grocery delivery for the first 2 weeks. "I've got it," he said at the time. I believed him. Not blindly. Just logically. Our marriage had never been extravagant. We vacationed modestly. We saved aggressively. We talked through major decisions. That's why the number $14800 hit differently. It wasn't just expensive. It was uncharacteristic. I lay there in the hospital bed thinking through every scenario that would make sense. Surprise anniversary gift? No. Wrong month. Work trip reimbursement? No. Personal email? Mistake? Maybe. But something inside me, the part that tracks inconsistencies for a living, was already aligning the facts. I wasn't fragile. I was observant. And the numbers didn't lie. Looking back, the cruise wasn't the first red flag. It was just the most expensive one. There had been smaller things over the years, charges I didn't recognize at first glance, subscriptions. He forgot to cancel spontaneous purchases framed as stress relief. A high-end grill during a tight quarter. A weekend golf trip booked without checking our calendar. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing dramatic. Just unaligned. Whenever I questioned it, he would sigh lightly. "I work hard too," he'd say. "I deserve something." Deserve. The word carried weight. Back then I rationalized it. Everyone copes differently. Not everyone finds comfort in spreadsheets. I told myself that my pragmatism balanced his spontaneity. Balance. It sounded healthy. But balance only works when both people are aware of it. There were emotional patterns too. When I felt overwhelmed at work and tried to talk through it, he would nod distractedly, then pivot the conversation to something lighter. "Don't overthink it," he'd say. "You always land on your feet." Always. Compliments can double as dismissal. When my chest pain first started, I mentioned it casually one night while washing dishes. "It's probably anxiety," he said without looking up from his phone. Anxiety. I let it go. I had always been the strong one. The planner. The stabilizer. He leaned on that identity more than I realized. When I managed tax filings and negotiated refinancing terms, he would tell friends, "She's the brains behind the operation." It sounded flattering, but it also meant he stepped further back. Financially, I carried the oversight. Emotionally, I carried the foresight. He carried enthusiasm. There had been arguments, of course. Nothing explosive. Just small recurring conversations about priorities. "We need to be careful this quarter," I would say. "You're always worried about the future," he replied. I wasn't worried. I was prepared. Then I felt different from now. Then I believed we were complementary. Now I see the asymmetry. He assumed I would absorb the consequences of impulsivity, that I would stabilize whatever wobbled, that my competence was a safety net. The surgery was the first time I wasn't fully operational, the first time I needed to be the one supported. And instead of stepping forward, he stepped sideways. When I replayed the confirmation email in my mind, I remembered something else. A comment he made 2 weeks before the procedure. "Maybe after this is over we'll both need a break," he had said. At the time I assumed he meant a quiet weekend at home. Now I wondered what he had already been planning. That should have been my first clue. Stress relief had always been his justification. But relief from what? From responsibility? From partnership? Or from me? Lying in that hospital bed, I wasn't just processing a credit card charge. I was revisiting years of rationalizations. Every time I minimized a purchase. Every time I excused my emotional absence. Every time I told myself that my steadiness compensated for his drift. The cruise wasn't a mistake. It was continuity. And continuity, once seen clearly, is difficult to ignore. The morning after surgery, everything felt heavier. Not dramatic, just weighted. Each breath required attention. Each shift in the bed pulled against the sutures across my chest. The nurse moved carefully around me, adjusting monitors and checking the incision with quiet competence. "You're healing well," she said. Healing felt abstract. My husband arrived mid-morning with a paper cup of coffee and a half-smile. "How are you?" he asked, placing the cup on the tray table I couldn't reach. "Sore," I said honestly. He nodded, glancing briefly at the monitor beside me. "That's normal," he replied. "Normal." He sat down, but his attention drifted quickly to his phone. His thumb moved steadily across the screen, scrolling, typing, pausing. "Work?" I asked. "Just stuff," he said without looking up. Stuff. The room felt smaller in his presence than it had when I was alone. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, trying to read what I had missed before. He wasn't cold. He wasn't unkind. He was distant. There's a difference. He stood up after 15 minutes. "I've got to run back home and take care of a few things," he said. "Call me if you need anything." Call me. The nurse had already explained I wasn't allowed to get out of bed without assistance. "I will," I said. He kissed my forehead lightly and left. The door clicked shut. The quiet that followed felt thicker than before. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the cruise confirmation in my mind. Azure Seas luxury cruise. 2 guests. Departure date during my recovery. The image of him on a deck overlooking blue water collided sharply with the sterile white of the hospital room. I told myself there had to be context. Maybe it was refundable. Maybe it was postponed. Maybe it was work-related and reimbursable. But none of those explanations aligned with the email. The nurse returned to check my vitals. "Your husband seems supportive," she said casually. I hesitated before answering. "He's busy," I replied. Busy. The word tasted different now. When I closed my eyes, I could almost feel the space between us widening. Not explosively. Incrementally. And somewhere beneath the morphine haze and the mechanical beeping, suspicion began to solidify. Not loud. Just steady. When the nurse stepped out to change shifts, I opened the shared email account again. Not because I needed proof. Because I needed clarity. The confirmation sat at the top of the inbox, unopened by him. Subject line. Azure Seas Premium Balcony Suite confirmed. Premium. I clicked. The details unfolded methodically. 7-night Caribbean itinerary. Private balcony cabin. Ocean view upgrade. Champagne welcome package. I scrolled slowly, reading each line as if precision might alter it. 2 guests. The second name field was blank. Blank. Not my name. Not anyone's yet. Just space. The departure date was fixed April 18. My discharge paperwork said no lifting for 6 weeks. No travel for at least 8. No strenuous activity. The cruise wasn't an oversight. It was scheduled. I kept reading. Luxury spa package included. Couples massage reservation held. Specialty dining add-on confirmed. Couples. The word pressed into my chest more sharply than the stitches. I imagined him clicking through options while I signed surgical consent forms, selecting cabin upgrades while I was calculating deductible costs. Each add-on felt deliberate. Not just a vacation. An experience. I scrolled to the payment details. Paid in full. Our joint credit card. The same card I had used to pay hospital deposits 2 weeks earlier. The same card I monitored weekly to keep our utilization low. I leaned back against the thin hospital pillow, letting the frustration rise without releasing it. There's a specific kind of humiliation that doesn't involve yelling or betrayal headlines. It's the quiet realization that someone planned joy while you were preparing for survival. I checked the timestamps. The booking had been completed the night before my pre-op appointment. That should have been my second clue. He had known the surgery date. He had driven me to the cardiologist's office. He had listened to the surgeon outline risks. And later that evening he had booked a balcony suite. I opened the attachment labeled Trip Summary. The description read like an advertisement. Sun-drenched decks. Endless horizons. Escape the ordinary. Escape. From what? The hospital room felt smaller again. My phone buzzed. A text from him. Heading back in an hour. Need anything? I stared at the message, then back at the confirmation email. Need anything? I typed nothing. Instead, I searched the email account for the cruise line name. There were 2 earlier messages. One from customer service confirming payment options. Another from him replying, "Let's make it special. Let's make it special." I felt the words settle with a different weight. This wasn't a stress relief purchase. It was anticipation. I opened our shared calendar. The dates were blocked off as out of office. Out of office. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the rhythm of the monitor beside me. Beep, beep, beep. Every beep reminded me I was still here. Recovering. Healing. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, he had constructed a parallel timeline. One where he was leaving. One where I was not included. The frustration wasn't explosive. It was controlled. Contained. I knew enough about finances to understand the implications. Cancellation policies. Refund deadlines. Dispute processes. But this wasn't just a charge. It was a decision. The nurse returned, smiling gently. "You look thoughtful," she said. I almost laughed. Thoughtful? I wasn't thoughtful. I was recalibrating. The email didn't just confirm a cruise. It confirmed a shift. And shifts once visible cannot be unseen. I didn't intend to search for more. The confirmation email should have been enough. But clarity has momentum. Later that afternoon, while he was still handling a few things at home, I opened our shared messaging app on the tablet he had left in my overnight bag. We sync everything. Schedules. Photos. Messages. Convenience. I wasn't snooping for secrets. I was looking for context. The thread with his closest friend Daniel sat near the top. The most recent message preview read, "Finally getting a break." Break. I tapped. The conversation scrolled upward. Daniel. "Man, you deserve this." My husband. "You have no idea." A timestamp from 3 days before my surgery. Daniel. 7 nights without hospital drama? My husband. Exactly. Sun drinks have no constant monitoring. Monitoring. I felt the word land sharply. Another message followed. Can't wait to disconnect. I need space. Space. The timeline tightened around me. Daniel. She'll be fine, right? My husband. Yeah. It's routine. She'll recover. Routine. The same word my mother had used. I kept reading. Daniel. You bringing someone? A long pause in the thread. My husband's reply came minutes later. Still figuring that part out. The room felt colder. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was absorbed. Each line rearranged something I had been rationalizing. This wasn't a spontaneous coping mechanism. It was anticipation. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was planning an escape. The next message was timestamped the night before the booking. "Let's make it special," he had written in the email. Now in the thread he added, "Booked the balcony suite. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it right. Doing it right." While I signed consent forms. While I asked the anesthesiologist about recovery timelines. While I assured everyone I would be strong. That was the moment I realized I wasn't the priority. Not my surgery. Not my recovery. Not my presence. He had already shifted into absence. The clarity wasn't dramatic. It was precise. He didn't hate me. He wasn't erupting in anger. He was simply reorganizing his comfort around my vulnerability. And that realization hurt more than the stitches. I locked the tablet and placed it back into my bag. The monitor beside me continued its steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. My body was recovering. My marriage was recalibrating. And for the first time since the notification appeared, the confusion dissolved. In its place was something steadier. Truth. I didn't confront him when he returned that afternoon. He walked into the hospital room with coffee and a casual smile, unaware that I had read the thread. I studied his face, looking for guilt or hesitation. There was none. That was enough to answer. Instead of arguing from a hospital bed, I did what I have always done when systems feel unstable. I reviewed the structure. When he stepped out to take a call, I phoned the credit card company. My voice was steady and clinical. "I'd like to freeze all non-essential transactions on this account," I said. The representative confirmed the request. Large purchases would now require dual authorization. I ended the call calmly. Next, I logged into our joint banking portal and reviewed access permissions. I removed overdraft protections tied solely to my income. I shifted a portion of my personal savings into an individual account that had previously been symbolic more than necessary. Symbolism no longer felt sufficient. 2 days later, during a physical therapy session, I scheduled a consultation with a financial attorney. Not because I was filing anything, because I needed to understand my position. Knowledge precedes decision. I didn't text him about the cruise. I didn't mention the thread. Emotional confrontation would have been immediately loud and easily reframed as post-surgery sensitivity. Instead, I replaced reaction with preparation. That shift felt unfamiliar at first. For years I believed communication solved everything. Now I understand that structure solves what conversation cannot. By the time he mentioned the cruise casually, "I might need a break after all this," the accounts were already safeguarded. He didn't know that yet. But I did. And sometimes control isn't about shouting. It's about silence timed correctly. What happened next would not be impulsive. It would be precise. The first family dinner after I was cleared to drive felt almost ceremonial. My mother had insisted on hosting. "It will be nice to celebrate your recovery," she said. Celebrate. The table was full. My parents. My sister and her husband. A cousin visiting from out of town. Everyone is polite. Everyone is curious. I wore a fitted dress that concealed the scar but not the memory. Halfway through dinner, my husband leaned back in his chair and said casually, "I might be traveling in a couple of weeks." Traveling? My father looked interested. Work? He shrugged lightly. "Just a short trip. I needed a reset after everything." Reset. The word hovered. I kept my fork steady. "A reset," I repeated gently. He smiled. "Yeah, sometimes you just need a break." Across the table, my sister nodded sympathetically. "You've both been through a lot." "Both." I placed my napkin on my lap and looked at him directly. "Is this the Caribbean cruise?" I asked calmly. The room stilled. His smile faltered just slightly. "What cruise?" my aunt asked. He cleared his throat. "It's nothing dramatic." That word again. "I saw the confirmation email," I said, keeping my tone level. "Azure Seas. Balcony suite. 2 guests." The silence that followed was heavier than the hospital monitor's beep. My father shifted in his seat. "You booked that before my surgery," I added softly. Not accusatory. Just factual. He inhaled slowly. "I was under a lot of stress." "Stress. And you needed space," I replied. The social stakes were clear now. This wasn't a private disagreement. It was transparent in a room full of witnesses. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Clarity carries its own volume. I reached into my purse and placed a single folded page on the table. Not dramatically, just deliberately. It was charged to our joint account on March 12th, I said evenly. 2 days before my preoperative appointment. My father leaned forward, scanning the printed confirmation. The departure date is April 18th, I continued. During my recovery period. My husband shifted in his chair. I was overwhelmed, he said quietly. I know, I replied. That was the part no one expected. I understand stress, I added. What I don't understand is planning an escape while presenting yourself as supportive. The room felt taut. I turned the page over. These are the email timestamps, I said. You booked the balcony suite at 10:42 p.m. The same night I was emailing my team about contingency plans. I wasn't angry. I was precise. My sister's husband cleared his throat. Did you talk about this privately? We didn't need to, I answered calmly. I addressed the structure. His eyebrows lifted slightly. I froze the joint credit card for non-essential purchases, I said. I separated my income into an individual account. And I've consulted an attorney to understand my options. The words landed with quiet authority. You froze the account? My husband asked. Yes. The silence that followed was not explosive. It was recalibrating. I didn't yell, I continued. I didn't accuse. I just corrected the risk. My father looked between us, absorbing the shift. You're overreacting, my husband said finally. I shook my head. I reacted proportionally, I replied. The distinction mattered. For months I managed our finances because I trusted our partnership, I said. Booking a luxury cruise during my hospitalization was not a partnership. No one interrupted. I placed the receipt back into my purse. I'm not here to embarrass you, I added. I'm here to be clear. The narrative had flipped without shouting. He wasn't the stressed husband needing escape. He was the man who miscalculated my tolerance. And I wasn't the fragile patient grateful for crumbs of support. I was the woman who understood contracts, timelines, and risk. What changed in that moment wasn't volume. It was perception. My mother exhaled slowly. You handled this differently than I would have, she said. That's the point, I replied. For the first time that evening I felt something steady settle back into place. Control. I let the silence linger before speaking again. I want to be clear about something, I said calmly. No one moved. My illness was not an inconvenience, I continued. It was a medical reality. I looked at my husband directly. Marriage is not an optional partnership you step out of when things become uncomfortable, I said. It's not something you take a break from while the other person is healing. He shifted slightly but said nothing. I didn't need perfection, I added. I needed presence. The room felt still but not hostile. If stress makes you disappear, then we don't have a partnership, I said evenly. We have convenience. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't humiliating him. I was defining the line. I won't accept being treated as temporary, I finished. Not in my own recovery. Not in my own marriage. Then I folded my hands calmly in my lap. Clarity once spoken doesn't require repetition. The dinner didn't explode. It dissolved. My husband tried to recover the narrative almost immediately. I was overwhelmed, he repeated. I just needed space. My father nodded cautiously as if weighing empathy against accountability. I understand overwhelm, I said quietly. I don't understand escape. There was nothing left to argue. On the drive home he was quieter than usual. You blindsided me, he said finally. I clarified, I replied. The distinction felt important. In the weeks that followed he shifted into damage control. Extra attentiveness. Offers to cook dinner. Casual mentions of canceling the cruise. It's refundable, he said one evening as if that resolved everything. Refundable wasn't the point. Trust rarely is. I didn't escalate. I didn't threaten. I simply separated our finances permanently. I met with the attorney again, this time not just for information but for action. I updated beneficiary designations, adjusted joint account permissions, filed paperwork that rebalanced access. Structure, not spectacle. My family's tone changed subtly. My mother stopped framing him as stressed and began asking me quietly how I was feeling. My father no longer assumed we were just going through a phase. Respect recalibrated when they saw that I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was responding strategically. At home, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to clarity. He moved through the house more carefully now, more aware. "You've changed," he said one night. "No," I replied. I stopped ignoring. The difference mattered. Peace didn't arrive as reconciliation. It arrived as an alignment. I no longer questioned whether I had overreacted. I no longer replayed the text thread in my mind, searching for alternative interpretations. The facts were simple. He planned escape during my vulnerability. I planned stability during his impulsivity. And when those two patterns collided, I chose structure over sentiment. The confusion that once blurred my perception faded. In its place was something steadier. Self-trust. For a long time, I confused endurance with love. I believed that if I carried more, managed more, tolerated more, then the foundation would remain stable. I thought partnership meant compensating quietly for imbalance. The surgery didn't weaken me, clarified me. When you're lying in a hospital bed stitched and wired to machines, you see things without distraction. You notice who leans in and who steps away. You notice whether presence feels natural or negotiated. Betrayal during vulnerability isn't just painful. It's revealing. The cruise wasn't about a vacation. It was about priority. About where comfort ranked when commitment was tested. I don't regret seeing it. Clarity costs less than confusion. I learned something simple but permanent. Love is not endurance. Love is participation. And I will never confuse the two again.